Welcome back. I am the Executioner, and today we're going to talk about how crime would be dealt with in a libertarian society. First, I will define crime as any action by an individual or group that seeks to deprive an individual of life, property, and happiness. Therefore, rape, murder, etc., including theft. Among libertarian theories on how we would deal with crime, one is by Samuel Edward Konkin, about the idea of restitution, and he does go into this in the new Libertarian Manifesto, and he is very much opposed to David Friedman's idea of how that would be handled, but I would like to go over Samuel Konkin's kind of interpretation of how it would be dealt with. So he is very much in favor of restitution. So if something is stolen, he is very much for the perpetrator being apprehended and the restitution being paid to the victim. Let's say if somebody's motorcycle was stolen and that person was apprehended via detective agency or insurance agency, etc., then the perpetrator would pay a restitution fee to the victim and their property would be returned to the victim, and all things would basically go their separate ways. So this is very much based on the idea of returning the stolen property, getting things handled, and very much an interesting way to deal with law. It is kind of an anti-law concept, but it's very different than David Friedman and other ideas on how to deal with law, including Stephen Kinsella's view. But there is another school of thought that is very much prominent in libertarianism, the Herman Hoppe approach, which would deal with law as a private good, which is similar to David Friedman's approach, but is very different. I would recommend Stephen Kinsella's blog consulting on this. But what people would deal with these problems, very much we would deal with criminals as a technical problem. So you would invest in locks, for example. You invest in firearms. You would invest in a whole sort of things. The market would provide great mechanisms to deal with crime. And there are some individuals that really cannot be reasoned with. Murderers, thieves, rapists, for example, habitual ones that really cannot be dealt with on the let's say restitution as Konkin would say, because a petty thief, it's easy enough to do restitution, but a career criminal who makes their living off of stealing other people's things, they're very much opposed to reason, including murderers, rapists, etc. These people are very much opposed to reason, so it would stand to reason that we need to deal with them in the same vein as an animal, for example. We put up fences to prevent predators from coming onto land on farms to feast upon lambs, etc. And a lot of people refer to page 173 of the Democracy, the God That Failed as basically a blank check in regards to deal with people as slaves, etc. I've heard that argument from agorists, but really what it is really dealing with is treating these criminals as if they're technical problems, at least. And there's a great article by Stephen Kinsella who goes into Hoppe's philosophy and very much how it is going over how one would deal with criminality in regards to people that cannot be reasoned with, murderers, rapists, etc., and that we really ought to treat them like technical problems. So in Democracy, the God That Failed, there is a chapter beforehand where there's a paragraph on kind of how law is dealt with and how law in a public society is very much not preferable due to the fact that the quality of the law is very much lacking. We have very wasteful police institutions that really don't have the ability to solve crimes as we would in a private society where market mechanisms would take care of law. David Friedman actually hypothesized rights arbitration, etc. This is very much opposed by agorists and those who go by Samuel Edward Konkin's theory, but I personally believe that there is middle ground to be had where some crimes could be dealt with restitution, but when you come into the area of rapists, murderers, etc., there definitely is an argument to be made that deterrence should be there. And I would say that deterrence is indeed treating rapists, murderers, etc. as technical problems where we install locks on our doors, we carry guns, we do that sort of thing, and it's really treating them as if they are indeed predatory animals. So that's just my take on libertarian law, how that would work, and just how that would go down in general. Now, there's a lot of philosophers who have tried hypothesizing about this. David Friedman goes over this, Stefan Kinsella, Hoppe, etc. They all have their own ways of going about law in a libertarian society. Now, the anti-law approach by Samuel Edward Konkin, as I've stated before, is very much based on restitution. The idea that self-defense, etc., would be handled by private means, like the other theorists I've stated beforehand, but it wouldn't be very much based on a court. It would be based on, I really don't know how to describe it in many ways, but it's a very curious take on how law would be dealt with. It would be very much private detective agencies, etc., restitution. But if for the severe crimes, self-defense, as I've read the New Libertarian Manifesto, would be the main way of dealing with that. So there are definitely pros and cons to each system, I would say. I definitely think that Samuel Edward Konkin was right in regards to petty thieves and petty crimes restitution-wise, but I think when you go into the area of murder, rape, etc., there really isn't any amount of restitution that can be made to compensate a family of an individual who had been murdered. Because how much money in the world is it really going to take for people to feel satisfied? There is no amount of money you could probably place on somebody's life. And Samuel Edward Konkin tried kind of doing that. He recognizes that it's very much subjective, but it's very much interesting. But I'll link down below some of the literature and kind of, this was my take on sort of the libertarian philosophers kind of trying to come up with a way how law would be dealt with. I'm very much Hoppe leaning, but I do see the Samuel Edward Konkin approach as very much appealing and can be applied in some instances. And remember, please like and subscribe and have a wonderful week.